president's credibility at risk after the New York Times reported President Trump asked James Comey, then FBI director, to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn. This story breaking just 24 hours after the Washington Post reported that the president revealed classified information to Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. The White House denying both stories. But the top editorial in the Wall Street Journal has a warning for the president. Quote, it reads, Mr. Trump needs to appreciate how close he is to losing Republicans he needs to pass the agenda that will determine if he is successful. America holds elections every 2 years, and Mr. Trump's policy allies in Congress will drift away if he looks like a liability. Joining us now is former Texas Congressman and presidential candidate Dr. Ron Paul. Dr. Paul, good to see you. Congressman, what is your take on this issue of credibility?
Well, I think it's pretty darn important, but I don't think it has to do with the events. The events are a distraction. It maybe makes things worse. But where the real credibility is lost is the fact that this country and the economy is in a mess, and they weren't doing so well on cutting taxes or solving the problem of many, many decades of the federal government being involved in medical care. So they're unsolvable when a country is bankrupt, and essentially we are. We can't afford to cut taxes. We can't afford to keep spending. Nobody wants to cut any spending. But then if they come along and then they have a political event, and then we have, you know, the Democrats coming up with a new issue every single day, and it's impossible to figure out which is fake news and which is real news, and we still don't know really what's going on with Comey. There's a lot to learn about that. But I think it's a combination of it all, and I think that it was destined to be very difficult to fix the government involvement in medical care, which is more than just Obamacare. That was the last straw. And for tax cuts, that's a different story, because there's a principle there endorsed by liberals and conservatives that you have to pay for it. You have to have offsets. But I believe if you're going to give people back their money, it's their money. Why do you have to have offsets?
Yeah, Dr.
You
Paul,
just have to cut spending.
Yeah.
Dr. Paul, Steve Forbes here. Talking about offsets, what do you make of this crazy proposal for a border adjustment tax, a 20% national sales tax? Why should Republicans be putting taxes on especially stuff bought by working families? Why not just do a pure tax cut, as you say? It's our money, not Washington's.
There you go, Steve, and you and I have agreed on this issue for a long time. We've talked about it. But no, this border tax, I used to think when you tax things at the border, it had something to do with tariffs, and tariffs were bad, and all economists were opposed to this. Then all of a sudden they've gotten, you know, the IMF and others to go along with some of the suggestions Trump has made on this. Now, that would only make things much, much worse. That's just gimmickry. You know, the freer the markets and the freer the trade, the less foreign policy problems that we have. And now we're drifting away to more protectionism and, of course, more buildups, military buildups. Just think of the weapons being promised to the Middle East right now. In the next 10 years, we may have promised $300 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia and these other countries.
Dr. Paul, you have been involved in health care, obviously, your whole professional life. In terms of things Republicans might do, what about requiring hospitals and clinics to actually post prices for their services so we start to get a consumer market? Any prospects of that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I never liked the word require, but I think that is the case. There's a private hospital in Oklahoma City. They went private.
Surgery Center of Oklahoma.
Yeah, and they list their prices because they want to know, and people pay cash, and it's still cheaper than going through the regular system. So, yes, that's what would happen. The only thing I can see is to make sure that is legal and to compete with the government system. We're never going to repeal government involvement in medical care, but we have to allow people to get out. That means we need to change the rules on insurance, let insurance companies do what they want. We have to be able to let people out of the system, not force them in, force people in that shouldn't be in it at all. Let people get out of it and deduct it from their taxes.
Kevin Kelly, all this is irrelevant pie-in-the-sky conversation unless Republicans can get their act together.
Yeah, and I think the only way to get their act together is to enact a tax cut initially, and then they can address health care. Kickstart the economy. Get out and let people to start spending money, pay down their debt. let it grow and start with that policy and then start to trickle out wins. And he promised them, and that's not happening. And just getting back to the health care, Dr. Paul brought it up. Health care accounts for 17% of our GDP right now, and it's growing. We got to address this problem head on and immediately.
Yeah, and you know, it all comes back to also, you know, what is driving this conversation? So much of it is public opinion. Dr. Paul, President Trump's approval ratings are very low right now, and Judge Napolitano was on the show earlier saying, how can Republicans govern? Because with his approval rating so low as it is right now, Republicans can't just pass all of these major pieces of legislation on their own, right, on this, you know, budget reconciliation line. How are they going to govern moving forward if they can't see any optimism, you know, in this approval rating going up in the White House? How do Republicans actually govern?
Well, a great deal of difficulty, and they're not going to be able to do it. Right now, I think the person that gets the most attention, who seems to be driving politics, is Chuck Schumer. Here, the Republicans have the House and the Senate and the presidency, and Chuck Schumer, you know, runs the show. But of course, he does have the, you know, the major media outlets that, you know, provide him the sounding board. But that's where the real problem is. But we also have a structural problem. I'm all for the tax cuts. Cut taxes, cut taxes, cut taxes. And it would be helpful. It would stimulate. But it still doesn't solve the problem of what happens when you have a monopoly control of interest rates and the monetary system, and you get malinvestment and facilitate deficits. That is structural, and deficits do have a consequence. And liberalism has taught, oh, well, you know, the deficits don't matter. The government's there. They'll pay for it, and the Fed can buy the debt. We need to address that, because that provides the ability for government to continue to spend. But still, I think we could get a reprieve so we could work on those other issues, like regulation, by getting the tax cut out there. That would be beneficial. But that is a job in itself. It looks like there'll be political punishment for Trump because he's not, you know, cooperating the way the opposition wants him to do. Right. So I think it's going to be very difficult.
Dr. Paul, I can't let you go without asking a question, even though it sounds exotic. Are we ever going to get our gold standard? You and I have been fighting this battle for years.
Yeah. Yes. Unfortunately, after a major crisis, because history shows when the system falls apart, they have to resort to going back to gold. But, Steve, I'm already on my gold standard. I put my reserves in gold, and then I do my other things. But my safety net has always been in gold ever since 1971. As soon as Bretton Woods broke down, I knew what would be going to happen. It was $35 an ounce. And now, of course, it's looking pretty good again, and it's up today. Guess what? You know, economic and political crises, gold goes up. Gold gets a big bounce today, and the stocks go down. So there is a gold standard out there, not the kind you and I might want, but there's a gold standard out there because you and I can buy gold once again, where up until 1975, it was illegal. You know, from Roosevelt on, it was illegal. So that was an improvement, but we still have a long way to go to get a standard of money that prevents the government from spending and running up deficits.